Hi, I'm Chelsea from Binge Eating Breakthrough, and I want to talk a little bit about the process of overcoming my binge eating habit, and kind of the evolution of it for those of you that might be dealing with feeling like you don't have control around food, or like you just get these cravings or urges to eat something, whether it's fattening stuff or sugary stuff or whatever, and you feel like you kind of are weak to those urges to the point that you give in and eat more than what you want to on a regular basis. So in my own kind of discovery of what I was dealing with, first I really started to realize that I was dealing with a brain that had a programmed habit, and that programmed habit was to eat, and to eat more than I wanted to, and to usually eat sugar or sweets like every night. And I developed a habit around that, basically from just years and years of restricting and trying to control my eating and trying different diets and all of these different things that had my brain, my primal brain, or what I might call my animal brain, in a triggered state. And that animal brain really was experiencing me restricting it and starving it. So whenever I would try a new diet, I would do well for, a week or two, and then suddenly I would just cave in a moment of weakness. And what I didn't realize at the time is that it was a response for my primal or animal brain, which its sole purpose is just to keep me alive and to help me survive. And that brain doesn't have super high logic. It's basically like talking to the mind of a 3-year-old. And so this brain was feeling like it was being restricted or starved or forced to eat certain things when it wanted to be comforted and to have food and to survive. So each time I would restrict it with a new dieting rule or principle, or try to shut down how much I was eating, my brain would basically react and say, no, like, I want to survive. We're going to do whatever it takes to rationalize eating and eating more, until we feel like, you are listening, right? So my animal brain would basically take over, and I would just turn to food and just feel like I was kind of out of control. It was like working with two different people, right? Like, my rational side would be like, I don't want to eat, a bunch of candy every night. But then when that time would come at night, suddenly I would just cave in and just not be able to get rid of the obsessive craving, and would just eventually sit down and eat until my, primal brain got satisfied that it had what it wanted, right? So I first had to just understand what was going on in my brain and why I was having these seemingly uncontrollable urges to eat. Once I got past that, though, I started to realize, as I started to research and get leverage on that and starting to reprogram like a new response and a new habit, once I got to that point, I also started to realize that it was actually what I was eating that was also causing addictive tendencies. So I started looking at what I was actually binging on or overeating, and that typically was like fatty or sugary foods, mostly sugary foods. Or even, sugar-free, it was still like the sweet foods. And as I started doing more and more research to help other people with this, I realized how addictive sugar is, meaning it creates a response in our brains that is very much like the response created in a brain of someone that's taking heroin or cocaine. Like, sugar actually activates the same part of our brain that drugs do. And for those of us that are susceptible to more addictive behaviors, that means that when we have sugar, it's almost like ingesting heroin or cocaine. Like, we actually can have that kind of reaction in our brain. And I started to really understand that not only was I dealing with just, a brain that felt restricted because I was trying to, have all these diets my entire life, I was also dealing with a brain that was responding to sugar in the same way as if I was taking cocaine or heroin. Like, my brain was really addicted to it, like, seriously. And so I started to really understand that eating processed foods or sugar-free stuff or just fake foods or sugary foods, anything that wasn't whole, was actually causing, an even greater problem. It wasn't just a habit now, it was an addiction. And I say addiction not to say like, oh, I have this disease called addiction, but to really help me develop the awareness, right? Once I had the awareness of what I was dealing with was not only a bad habit, but it was an addiction, then I could approach it from the perspective of what works to help people overcome addictions. And that's when I really had the breakthroughs. It's like, oh God, like, my brain not only is triggered and feeling like I'm, starving it, so it's wanting me to eat and it's going to rationalize eating however it will. Not only was I dealing with that, but I was also dealing with a brain that was addicted to the chemical reaction from sugar. So it was really going to drive me to eat sugar on a regular basis because I was like a drug addict with sugar, right? And so it was like the combination of those two forces that were practically impossible to overcome until I had an awareness of what was going on. And once I started to get that awareness, then not only could I started developing new behaviors and new responses whenever I would feel the urge to overeat or to eat sugar or whatever every evening. First, I had the distinctions, the awareness of that, but then I started to really understand that by changing what I was putting into my body, I could make it even easier to overcome the habit. So it was hard at first, and that meant just not eating sugar, which was probably the hardest thing at first because, my God, that's what I had been eating for so long, like years and years. Whether it was not necessarily sugar, it was sugar-free stuff, but like my addiction to like sweeteners and diet sodas and all this processed crap, I realized that's got to go in order for me to really be unaddicted, because it's me continuing to eat those kind of things, whether they have calories or whatever, that it's my eating of these processed, crappy, sugary things that's actually continuing to keep me addicted. And so if I need to, put into place a new habit, I actually need to break an addiction. And so that meant stopping eating sugar. And for some people it works to go cold turkey. It's actually what works best for me is just to stop completely, and then just go through whatever motions I go through, in the first few days and weeks to just overcome the urge to eat the sugar. And some people it works better just to incrementally decrease how much you're eating so your taste adjusts over time. Either way, it's kind of the combination of creating a new habit and then also being aware that you could be addicted and you have to kind of deal with an addicted brain and how to break through that. And you can do that by replacing the addictive substances with whole foods, with foods that are from nature, with the very basics. And I also realized that by increasing my fat intake of wholesome good fats, not crappy processed fats, but wholesome omega-3 fats from whole foods, the more I had fats in my body, the less I had the urge to eat sugar. And I, for 16 years, had avoided fat like the plague. I thought that fat meant I would get fat, not realizing that the whole fats and the omega-3 kind of fats from avocados, from coconut oil, from olive oil, from grass-fed meats, those kind of fats were the fats that actually would reduce my cravings for sugar. So I started eating more and more fats, and that made it way, way easier to not eat sugar and not even feel compelled to eat sugar because I was nourished from the fats. So it was interesting kind of noticing the chemical changes in my body. So I say this just to share this with you. If you're dealing with feeling like you don't have control around food, or you eat more than you want to on a regular basis, or maybe around sugar, you just can't seem to not eat sugar on a regular basis, I would like to just point out that perhaps what you're dealing with, and a way to break through that is to just acknowledge that you just need to create a new habit because your brain has this habitual behavior that you've programmed it with, which is eat sugar or overeat on a regular basis for whatever reasons you do that. And also that it might be a bit of an addiction, so you have to kind of figure out how to approach that from the level of, how do I break an addiction to something? And I might go through some withdrawals, and it might be hard for the first couple weeks, and then it's just going to get easier, just as addictions are. And also noticing that if you are in that space, to replace what you are eating with wholesome foods from nature, like the purest of pure, foods that have no additives and no preservatives and nothing processed, but like raw whole foods. And that actually will make it much easier to overcome the addiction to sugars and sweets and processed foods, because you'll be replacing your body with the nutrients that it naturally wants. So I hope this helps. If you're dealing with this and you want to have some support, you can check out my free video course on my website at bingeeatingbreakthrough.com. And I also have a lot of articles and tips about what's worked for me to really help you if this is something you're dealing with. Thank you.